From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We start in Ecuador, where President Lenin Moreno has given a 12-hour ultimatum for kidnappers to show if the two journalists and their driver abducted near the border with Colombia are still alive. President Moreno interrupted his visit to the Summit of the Americas in Lima and flew back to Quito to deal with the crisis. Ecuador had been in a state of agitation after it emerged that the government had received photos from the Colombian TV station RCN, which suggested the three kidnapped had been killed. Journalist Javier Ortega, photographer Paul Rivas, and driver Efraín Segarra were abducted in the community of Mataje, near the border with Colombia, on March 26. Moreno said it was probable that the journalists were dead, but his government would wait for a proof of life. Otherwise, the kidnappers would face a forceful response.
I give these drug traffickers 12 hours to give us proof that our fellow citizens are alive. Otherwise, we will act with full force. I felt the pain that all Ecuadorians feel, an immense sorrow that accompanies us. When President Santos called me today, I told him in the afternoon that we are asking for strong action on their part. Enough of words, I said.
The Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos confirmed he spoke with his Ecuadorian counterpart. Santos took to Twitter to reiterate that Ecuador has all his support in this matter, as well as the support of the armed forces and the Colombian people. Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, Cesar Navas, was greeted with screams and chants from the press corps as he tried to explain that the authorities still couldn't confirm the authenticity of the photos. The head of forensics, Fausto Olivo, said the clothing seen in the photos seemed to match that of two of the abducted men, and that extra analysis showed a high probability that the third one could also be seen in the pictures. Navas said that experts will continue to work on the investigation along with the authorities in Colombia. But amid tears and heckling, family, friends, and colleagues protested at the government's response and demanded clear answers.
There is no confirmation at the moment of the veracity of the pictures. We've talked to the families of the kidnapped men, we've given them all the information and offered our solidarity. Our country is facing new challenges in the fight against organized transnational crime, which is operating from Colombian territory and which aims to use the border to promote a narco-economy. We will not allow this. I repeat, the investigation will continue. We talked to the Colombian authorities, who also analyzed the pictures and said the evidence is not conclusive.
Outside the presidential palace in Quito, people protested once again after the government announcements. They demanded the return of the team of journalists alive. This was the 18th vigil protesters have held since the three men were taken. And the VIII Summit of the Americas begins in Lima, Peru, without the presence of Moreno, the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, and U.S. President Donald Trump, who sent his Vice President Mike Pence on his behalf. In the meantime, social movements and political organizations are holding their own People's Summit, which began Tuesday and runs parallel to the Summit of the Americas. Organizers and participants have largely written off the high-level government summit as being conducted by right-wing administrations trying to pass neoliberal trade policies, and have planned a number of events that they say are more inclusive and will aim to deal with issues that matter to the people.
We believe that faced with this failed summit of the Americas, it's necessary to respond and offer counter-proposals. And what better way to do this than amid the diversity and plurality we have in Latin America, which is faithfully represented at this time at the Summit of the Peoples.
We know very well that the Summit of the Americas is actually managed by North America, by imperialists and capitalists. And us, as social organizations, have been cast aside.
We don't need him to meddle in any matters. They only apply to us. The people, in this case, in Venezuela. It's only us Venezuelans who have the right to decide our country's fate.
This alternative People's Summit of the Americas in Lima has agreed it will move to reject any and all kind of imperialist harassment against revolutionary processes and oppose the persecution of the Latin American left.
They are representatives of civil society from more than 15 Latin American countries. They are against neoliberalism because they believe it only benefits the rich and that the OAS aims to expand U.S. domination.
There is a geopolitical vision of Latin America and the Caribbean as zones directly controlled and influenced by the U.S. This constantly comes from the Monroe Doctrine and other policies expressed and applied by the U.S.
The OAS is also accused of corruption, an example of which lies in a report about Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the OAS, using Peruvian state resources to send a delegation to protect the interests of former President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. Almagro also stands accused of misusing funds from the Anti-Corruption Commission of Honduras.
That money was siphoned off to pay people who didn't work in that commission. They have managed it in a very shady way, without the Honduran officials knowing what the money was used for. This was done without a care for Honduras' poverty-stricken.
Social movements ended their intervention by declaring support for revolutionary causes and condemning the persecution of progressive Latin American leaders. They have declared that, for the second time, the People's Summit outshone the main summit of the Americas, as had occurred in Mar del Plata in 2005.
The right-wing governments of the Pacific Alliance tried to make it stronger nonetheless. Trump has decided not to attend. Some leaders of right-wing governments also doubt whether they should attend. Our governments know why the right is doubtful, because this is a forum where nothing is decided, nothing is legitimized, and nothing moves forward in the fight against inequality. And so now various countries are turning their backs.
The day ended with a mass demonstration against imperialism, where flags of the Bolivarian and Cuban Revolution flew high in calls for the release of detained former Brazilian President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, Bolivia's maritime sovereignty, and other causes of the people.
Now moving to Brazil, where members of Congress from the country's left-wing parties are taking action in solidarity with jailed former President Lula da Silva. A group of senators will go to Curitiba to investigate the limitations placed on Lula's visits.
The Human Rights Committee of the Brazilian Senate has decided that some of its members should evaluate the conditions in which the former President Lula da Silva is being detained. So next Tuesday, a group of lawmakers will be heading to Curitiba.
A delegation of senators will go to look at Lula's situation there in Curitiba, because he's being held in isolation, without visits. 9 governors went to see him and weren't admitted, although they have the right. So these senators should go and see the conditions in which President Lula is being held, because Lula is now a political prisoner.
Earlier on Thursday, some of Lula's relatives were allowed a visit. Nonetheless, the senators say the isolation measures violate basic principles of human rights, not least Lula's right to dignity.
The worst thing about these restrictions is that visits are only being allowed for his lawyers, who obviously are working on his case, and close relatives. But the law is clear. Visits are included for the prisoner's partners, spouses, and friends. On what grounds is this judge preventing them? He has no grounds, and that's another reason why we need to go.
In the lower house, the opposition has decided to block proceedings and not pass any legislation until Lula is freed and democracy restored.
We in the House of Representatives will not allow this situation to pass for normal. We won't let the parliament work normally. The Workers' Party group is blocking everything. And we have the support of the PDT, the PSB, the Communist Party of Brazil, and the PSOL, who are blocking things with us. So it's not any specific project we're blocking. It's a political boycott.
On top of this, 60 members of Congress have asked to include Lula in their official parliamentary names, in solidarity with the jailed leader. This means that each time the Speaker calls them, their name will be called as Lula, and Lula's name will appear constantly on the electronic voting board.
In little more than a month, Venezuelans will head to the polls to vote in the country's presidential election. However, after a no-vote abstention campaign led by the country's opposition bloc, the MOOD, candidates have their work cut out. Freddie Gillingham has more.
Some of Venezuela's presidential candidates are taking to the streets. Henry Falcon, the only serious contender to the incumbent President Nicolas Maduro, is trying to drum up support. Generating a pre-election buzz with his supporters in Maracay this week was the main objective. Though some supporters did come out to greet Falcon, he does not have nearly as much support as he would like. Some other opposition leaders have been calling for abstention in May's election, and Falcon is fully aware of the dangers that poses for his campaign.
On the streets, what we are feeling is that this is growing as a snowball, that is going to be a true encounter, a national celebration, as soon as we can offer the world a new government.
Over in Caracas, the president of the country's National Electoral Council, Tibisay Lucena, was outlining the rules and regulations ahead of May 20th. She insisted there will be no change of date, despite continual calls from the opposition.
We have considered all the requests. We saw it, but it is not in the plans of the Electoral National Council. A change on the dates. There is going to be an election on May 20th, a presidential election and the regional legislative council's elections.
Campaigning is set to begin officially on April 20th. Freddie Gillingham, teleSUR, Caracas.
And Venezuela's opposition presidential candidate Henry Falcon, who we just saw in that report, has now taken his campaign to the city of Valencia. He told voters there he would win and promised them he would pay salaries in dollars, but he didn't say where he would get the foreign currency from.
Nicolás Maduro has been defeated because of his incompetency.
But the Venezuelan opposition has not mobilized.
The Venezuelan opposition is 82% of the country that rejects the government of Nicolás Maduro. The opposition is not about one or two parties. The opposition is the people who are suffering from hunger.
According to recent polls, Nicolás Maduro is 10 points ahead of you.
We are 20 points ahead in the polls. The world must know that he has lost.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. The FARC political party in Colombia has protested outside the offices of the Special Peace Jurisdiction to demand the release of their member, Jesus Santrich. Members of the former guerrilla movement are demanding that the department, which was part of the peace agreement signed with the government, takes over Santrich's case. The senior member, who was a signatory of the peace accord, was arrested after the U.S. accused him of drug trafficking. They criticized President Juan Manuel Santos for not fulfilling the deal signed in Havana in 2016.
Once the special jurisdiction of peace takes over this process, we demand the annulment of the whole process, meaning the annulment of the arrest, the annulment of the actions taken by a judicial authority like the General Attorney's Office, which had no right to do so.
And Santrich has sent an audio message from the prosecutor's office where he's detained.
I am detained here in the prosecutor's office, where the staff have looked after me wonderfully, allowing me to communicate with the outside world constantly, so I want to take advantage of this opportunity to send a message of peace, of optimism to everyone. I don't only have moral strength, but also physical strength. I told everyone that I have begun my last fight, which is the fight for dignity. A while back, I talked about the difficulties within the peace process. A few months ago, I talked about the fact that we are in a transition and that they are pushing us towards the chasm of what could be a failed peace process. We are the ones who need to do the impossible, because the possible is what common people are responsible for every day.
In Argentina, the National Federation of University Teachers has started a general national strike.
Empty classrooms again. A new time to fight. 40 days after classes started, teachers still have no answers from the national government regarding the requests.
We will protest for 48 hours in 57 public universities here in Argentina. We are very specific. We want the government to stop reforming the university, science and technology system, and to sit with us to discuss a salary increase.
More than 190,000 teachers across the whole country reject the government's proposal of increasing salaries just 9%. This is way below the announced inflation rate for 2018, which is expected to be above 20%.
There has not been a response from the government, and we believe that it won't increase our salaries more than 15%, which has actually happened in other places. They are condemning us to losing our purchasing capacity.
Meanwhile, scientists and university students question the severe budget cuts for public education. This prevents them from developing investigation tasks and from granting scholarships.
These difficulties for science come from the same issue: adjustments, cuts, lacks of funds for their sector. This destroys community policies that have been working for 12 years and throws investigation projects into an abyss.
Teachers say that the adjustments made by Mauricio Macri have a terrible effect on public education. This doesn't just reduce salaries, but also damages students' development. They have said that they will continue with the actions until they see salary improvements in the collective agreement of university workers.
Anti-corruption protests are underway in Guatemala City against the government of Jimmy Morales.
We are here in the historic center of the capital of Guatemala, where a demonstration against corruption has started. Social movements are demanding that President Jimmy Morales choose an attorney general that benefits the country, and not one that wants to defend his own family members who are being investigated for corruption. He himself is facing several charges regarding illicit electoral funding. On May 17, President Jimmy Morales will choose the new attorney general, while in the streets, people are still demanding transparency and impartiality in the process.
That was Mario Rosales from Guatemala. And we'll take a short break now, but join us after this look at what our multimedia colleagues report. Welcome back. At least one Palestinian has been injured at the Gaza-Israel border as Palestinians resume their mass protests for a third consecutive Friday. Israeli security forces have been attacking peaceful protesters. Last month, the demonstrators launched a 6-week protest demanding refugees to return to their former homes that are now inside Israel. Since March 30, Israeli forces have killed 33 Palestinians and wounded hundreds of others. The protests are scheduled to peak in mid-May for the 17th anniversary of the founding of Israel. In response to Trump's social media saber-rattling, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova has pointed out the contradiction between the U.S. president's hot-tempered campaign against fake news and his eagerness to launch a military strike based on unverified information.
The noises from the mouth of the leadership of the United States of America, primarily from the U.S. president, who was the first person who had announced a crusade against fake news, against information dumps, against information which instead serves as disinformation. How can he, realizing the price of false information, take the most responsible decisions regarding the use of force against a sovereign state without having a real picture of what actually happened?
As the world population continues to grow, one of the major challenges is to secure a viable food supply. To meet the demand, edible insects are now becoming a popular substitute for other proteins. Several insect farms have appeared in the United States, Canada, and South Asia, like this U.S. company Beta Hatch, which processes the mealworm's larvae of beetles into protein-rich food for fish. These proteins are produced by converting organic waste into nutrients for the food system. In Trinidad and Tobago, LGBT activists are celebrating a landmark ruling calling a pre-colonial law outlawing buggery unconstitutional, thereby decriminalizing homosexuality in the country. Justice Devendra Rampersad declares Section 13 of the Sexual Offences Act null and void. It means that part of the law will eventually be struck down completely. Activists gather outside the Hall of Justice as they awaited the decision on the law which essentially criminalizes homosexuality in the country. The challenge was brought by activist Jason Jones. Pro and anti-LGBT activists have been staging demonstrations all week in anticipation of today's ruling.
People have been saying for the last year it's the Rosa Parks moment for us. And I think that now there is something very tangible for us to move forward with that will incentivize people. I've seen incredible things happening on the ground, particularly on Monday when they were in front of Parliament. I think now people have an idea that, you know, we can effect change. And though I acted independently with this matter, which was for very strategic legal reasons, I fully intend to work with local groups and Equal Opportunity Commission to start looking at least finally getting inclusion in the Equal Opportunity Act.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. This and other stories are found on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla González. Thank you for watching.
Conspiracy.